and action.
In this video, I'm going to look at simple but effective cinema shots you can create with a smartphone gimbal. While different gimbals have different features, all these shots should be achievable with most 3-axis gimbals. With most modern smartphones, the inbuilt stabilization is so good you often don't need a gimbal anymore. However, the gimbal can achieve movement that you can't achieve with your hands and arms alone. For example, that 3-axis gimbal head allows you to swoop from the ground to maybe a meter above your head in one smooth movement. Those who say their phone's inbuilt stabilization is a gimbal killer are probably only thinking of gimbals as nothing more than a handshake remover. But in my opinion, they're much more than that. They can be used as very low-cost Steadicams and even mini jib arms, which both cost thousands of dollars to hire and operate. Cinema has been around for over 100 years. For the majority of that time, camera movement was relatively limited. Movement of the camera had started to develop during the silent era, but the invention of synchronized sound initially involved placing the camera in a soundproofed box, and cinematic camera moves were temporarily suspended. For me, a motionless or slow-moving camera is what I think of as more classical cinema, like a painting by an old master. However, legendary filmmakers like Orson Welles introduced some memorable camera movements from the 1940s onwards. The invention of the Steadicam liberated the cinema camera from needing to be placed on a tripod, jib arms, or dolly tracks. While these pieces of standard filmmaking kit enabled the camera to move and are still in use today, they are expensive, involve lots of crew, and inhibit spontaneity. With smartphone cameras being so small and lightweight, in combination with a relatively cheap 3-axis gimbal, cinematography has never been so flexible. That said, the style and quantity of camera movement you include in your work depends a lot on what kind of film you want to make. Certainly, it's tempting to fill our films with eye-catching, chaotic camera moves, but filmmakers usually keep movement subtle so as not to take people out of the story. One of the simplest cinematic shots you can achieve with a gimbal is a tracking shot where the camera follows the subject. In cinema, this shot became used after the invention of the Steadicam, which allowed the camera to move almost as freely as a person moves. Well-known long tracking shots were renowned as they were seen as adventurous moves by visionary directors. These days, anyone with an iPhone and a $100 gimbal can achieve similar results. Following a subject this way gives the viewer a similar point of view to the subject. We experience their journey as they experience it. Before lightweight cameras and gimbals, this shot could only be achieved using a jib arm. This tool is still part of the professional filmmaker's kit, but you need the budget and the space to assemble it. Essentially, the shot involves starting high and slowly dropping the camera to a lower position. Having the camera descend from a higher position is a way of introducing your audience to a story or a scene in a story. Note that movies sometimes start with the camera swooping down as an introduction and then end with the camera pulling away and upwards. Well, it makes sense to start wide and move in at the beginning, doesn't it? In this way, the audience arrives at and departs from the story in a kind of magical way, like invisible ghosts. The first part of the shot is an establishing shot to orient the audience, moving to focus on a particular character or element contained within the wider picture. Basically, as a filmmaker, you're saying, this is where the story takes place. Now, look at this. Basically, this is the reverse of the drop-down shot. As I said in the previous shot, this shot is often used at the end of the sequence or story. But both these shots can be used at any time you want to take the audience from a regular angle to a wider overview, or vice versa. To add even more height to these shots, you can extend the gimbal arm. Most gimbals have a standard screw mount at the bottom, which should fit a tripod or a monopod. Use your gimbal to enable you to circle your subject more smoothly. Having the camera circle the subject is a shot used in movies and TV for decades. It used to involve the lengthy process of setting up a circular track around the subject. However, we can now achieve these shots with a low-cost 3-axis gimbal. Circling a subject adds style and gives a scene a more fluid feeling, compared to cutting back and forth between static shots. The shot also gives the audience a more three-dimensional view of the scene, compared to flat, motionless shots in one direction. For example, a scene might be put together from a series of fixed-angle shots with carefully designed lighting. But by circling the scene, the audience sees it from a more fluid point of view. This also makes lighting harder, as lighting equipment might end up in the shot. So, either you accept your lights will appear in shot, limit the movement so as to avoid them appearing in shot, or you shoot in a location that requires no lighting. With an approach shot, the camera moves slowly in towards the subject. This is a very common shot in movie making, which in the past was performed by setting up a track. Often when the camera's on tracks, a cinematographer will move the camera in onto a subject so slowly it's almost imperceptible. But this movement can add subtle intrigue and tension to a shot. To recreate such a shot using a handheld gimbal is actually pretty hard, because it requires a very steady movement. However, we can also try faster approach shots. If we think of a shot as being in 3 parts, this shot takes us from a wide view to a close-up in one movement. You can use your gimbal to have your camera fly over the subject, as if it was a drone, for example. While performing this with a heavier camera is more complicated, this is the perfect way to make the most of that lightweight smartphone camera and gimbal. In the 3rd episode of Silent Eye, The Unlocking Thought, I used a flyover shot with the actor Henk laid out on the hotel bed having his mind read. The shot added some interest for the viewer, while not too much else visual is actually happening in the scene at this point. The shot was quite tricky, as the gimbal is not quite designed for this position and it kept twisting in different directions. Plus, I didn't extend the gimbal handle, so I was reaching across Henk with my arms extended, and it was quite difficult to keep the shot steady. Having said that, the gimbal handle still gave me some extra reach I wouldn't otherwise have had. It's easier to use your gimbal to move around, approach, or pull back from a stationary subject. However, if you want to add extra style and interest to the shot, then try combining gimbal and subject movement. The obvious one is when following a subject walking, with both camera and subject going in the same direction at the same speed. However, if you have the gimbal and the subject going in different directions and different speeds, things start to get a lot more interesting. In this approach shot in Regen, episode 2 of Silent Eye, I had the actors move in from behind the camera, while I moved slowly forward with the camera on a gimbal. It was actually an idea I'd seen in a movie and thought it was a cool shot we could try with just a smartphone and gimbal. In this circle shot from episode 4, I follow the actor as both the car and the actor are moving. We planned the shot to work this way so that all 3 of us, actor, camera and car, are moving in different directions but come together as the actor climbs into the back of the car. But you can get really creative here, and you're only limited by your imagination. Combining subject and camera movement really gives you endless options. Either shoot in slow motion or add slow motion in post. Using slow motion adds extra style and smoothness to the shot. While slow motion can be overdone, it's great for travel and product videos. It's tempting to stand back from a scene and choose an angle which brings in everything you want in the frame, but with everything at the same distance from the camera. And this shot kind of makes everything look a bit flat. That's not to say this is a bad shot. But you know, it's not the only shot in town. Choosing a shot with objects in the foreground gives you extra depth and interest to the frame. When the foreground moves across the frame faster than the background, it makes the shot feel more three-dimensional. Sometimes a scientific sounding name is used to describe this: the parallax effect. Essentially, the closer the camera is to the foreground object, the more exaggerated the effect. In my opinion, the parallax effect is more stylish if the camera is moving in a straight line, rather than circling the subject. If you circle the subject, then you'll be reducing the effect, because the subject remains in the same position in the frame, while only the background moves. Alternatively, try moving the camera through or past foreground objects. So that's it for this week. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you want some bonus content, keep watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Oh no. I got off the train, all the bus stops are different colours, like green. I'm like, I'm not in London anymore. Oh no.
I've only done regular and Dakar.
At least you're
Only done those two.
yeah. But it's not that useful. Like I applied for this free haircut.
Is that very? Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
I thought it was one in September. Oh no. I travelled like 2 hours with free haircut because it was like people who were training. Yeah.
Pretty good. I hope you're confident.
It was nice. It was like a hug.
Rolling. C3, take 7. Action.
Yes.
Let's get to work.